Imagine a world without the written word, without numbers, without farming, without the wheel, without cities, without nations, no democracy, no structure. What would the world for humans look like without religion and science? No astrology, no astronomy, no books, no recorded history, zero mathematics. A world of clustered groups, unorganized tribes and hunter-gatherers, a place where humans were not the dominant species on this planet, but just another animal fighting to survive. For almost all of human history, this was actually our reality. You see, an informational bottleneck had meant that our biologically identical brethren simply had an inability to reach their genetic potential. But then everything changed. And today, compared to the rest of nature, we really are a species with magical and almost godlike powers. Whether that's literally magical or just technologically, it's kind of irrelevant at this point. Compared to the rest of nature, we operate with some form of Clark tech. It's like magic. Our ability to efficiently and effectively transfer information horizontally and vertically from one group or generation to another has led to resource abundance, the scientific method, the internet, artificial intelligence, and now we're even cheeky enough to ponder the very nature of consciousness. Who knows, perhaps one day we'll colonize galaxies and build simulations of our universe just for fun. You see, Homo sapiens, or anatomically modern humans, were around for at least 295,000 years before creating civilization. That's not behaviorally modern, by the way guys, that's anatomically modern. And that's ignoring other intelligent hominids who were around much longer than that. For some reason, there was a glitch in the matrix around 6,000 years ago, when the Sumerians flourished. When we are taught about our history at school, we often hear of kings, queens, medieval knights. We cover the Romans, we cover the Greeks, and if we're lucky we may even cover the Egyptians. But are you not curious as to why we never cover the first major civilization? Today, we'll learn from those who went from 0 to 1, who came from literally nothing and gave us the blueprint to, well, everything. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that some of these innovations may still have occurred without the Sumerians. However, measuring when or guessing when that would happen is irrelevant and impossible. In fact, it's incalculable. Because without the Sumerians, we wouldn't have had the concept of advanced civilization, urban planning, large-scale agriculture and architecture, mathematics or time. So, without the Sumerians, we wouldn't have had the Egyptians or Greeks or Romans, most likely, okay? And then thus the Renaissance science period. Right now, where we are today, it may have taken another 10, 50, 100, 200,000 years of hunter-gatherer lifestyle or small-scale agricultural lifestyle, before we actually get to the point of what the Sumerians achieved. The Sumerians were one of the first civilizations and believed to be the first major one. They lived in ancient Mesopotamia, which would be modern-day Iraq, Syria and Iran. The Sumerians were not always a unified empire, but generally they functioned as a group of city-states with similar principles and trade relations. Peace and prosperity was common, however disputes would naturally occur over things such as land and other resources. Sumerian religion had many gods, who came apparently to Earth in search for gold. Their religion was highly complex, which has led to modern speculation about the true meaning behind their ancient religious texts. more and more scholars are warming to the idea that the Sumerians were actually referencing aliens when writing about their gods, the Anunnaki. Keep in mind this was 6,000 or so years ago. Being as the Sumerians came from almost nowhere with unthinkably advanced technology in an unthinkably fast amount of time, an understanding of astronomy and maths and stories of gods from another planet, one that was still in our that apparently is still in our solar system, a planet called Nibiru. It really does pose some challenging and interesting questions which we humans must approach with caution, but also an open mind. Okay, so I'm not saying delve 100% into this and say, oh my god, we were created by aliens, but what I am arguing is we need to keep an open mind, because these texts are far older than any other religious texts that we have. In fact, they're some of the oldest texts that exist. The reason this is especially intriguing is because the earliest versions of the Sumerian religious story, the earliest versions, focused on cosmogony, the cosmos or universe. These tablets weren't necessarily spiritual, but funnily enough, they are actually practical, based on our 3D reality and referencing powers from outer space. And these powers from outer space actually imbued lesser animals or hominids with intelligence in order to assist them. So in their oldest texts, because later on, what we have translated from the modern text, the more modern text, it appears that they're referencing things like the sky, the sun, etc. But when you look at their oldest texts, they're actually talking about people from outer space. So you can say heaven, but outer space. Again, like all religious stories, this is highly speculative and based on, tablets that people have translated. But it definitely makes you think. These hunter-gatherers within the region randomly develop high-tech and maths for no apparent reason. They create agriculture almost instantly, and alongside believe in super intelligent alien-like gods. Only time will honestly tell, and I'll most likely make a video about Sumerian religion later on in the future. Now, I want to start with the 0 to 1 inventions. By the way, 0 to 1 is a concept which Peter Thiel coined in an amazing book, 0 to 1. But with regards to the Sumerians, the 0 to 1 inventions were the inventions that were so revolutionary, so groundbreaking, that they caused a paradigm shift for humanity, which ultimately led us straight down on the path of advanced tech to where we are today. So first I want to begin with written language. Yes, the Sumerians created written language. Now, there are many earlier examples of proto-writing or symbolism from all over the world. By proto-writing, I do mean relatively simple symbols referencing ideas and literal experiences. However, the Sumerians were the first to create a solid, large-scale, usable script, one that was obviously engraved onto tablets. This script was called cuneiform, and they typically write stories, poems, battle reports, invoices, educational material, and honestly they used it like how we use the written language today. They even, by the looks of it, created some naughty stories on these tablets as well. By 3000 BC, cuneiform had shrunk from 1000 characters to 600, taking on a more phonetic form. What's mind-blowing is that people used this script for 3 millennia. And before it was 3 millennia before it was phased out by alphabetical forms during the Roman era. That's an almost inconceivable amount of time for a script to survive, being passed on from culture to culture and adopted and upgraded by civilization to civilization. It only goes to show how much of a game changer the Sumerians really were for humanity. Following on from that, we have another 0 to 1 invention or innovation. the concept of time and the base 60 system, okay? Now, I don't mean they literally created time, but the way that we measure time today was a gift from the Sumerians, okay? Now, the base 60 system, or sexagesimal system, is a number system which is highly divisible, while still being relatively easy to use on our hands, using our knuckles. Invented in the 3rd millennium BC, it allowed our current measurements of hours, minutes and seconds to emerge. And it also gave us measurements of angles, paving the way for geometry. Prior to this, there was no time or angles, at least no, let's say, structured, organised way to create angles or to measure how the day goes. It's really impressive because, like I said, this was 5,000 years ago and we still use the same system today. We simply cannot optimize it. They found it, they discovered it, they created it. We also have the Sumerians to thank for our lunar calendar, the way that we track our months, splitting the year into 12. The Sumerians were the first organised peoples to properly map different constellations, and this was later observed by the Greeks. In addition to that, there are some arguments to be made that the Sumerians may have understood more about astronomy than modern academics actually let on, with various tablets showing the planetary systems revolving around the sun, thousands of years before Copernicus. Please keep in mind though, that this is somewhat controversial amongst mainstream academics. So, just to clarify, the Sumerians not only gave us the written word, but they gave us our concept of time, geometry, and mathematics. Without any of that, who knows where we'd be? We'd most likely still be cave people. Okay, so now that I've introduced the foundational layer of innovation from the Sumerians, maths, written language, understanding of the sky, time, etc., I want to talk about the subsequent inventions that were built on top of that fundamental knowledge. Without that fundamental knowledge, written language, we wouldn't be able to trade schematics or plan any sort of engineering product, for example. So off of those base inventions, we build pretty much everything we know today, okay? Now, here's a list of some of the other groundbreaking inventions the Sumerians gave us. Copper fabrication, which eventually led to advanced metallurgy. The wheel and chariot, so not just the wheel, but the actual machine that can carry things, the chariot. They also invented the plough, so basically they made farming infinitely more efficient. They also created all of our modern farming practices. By that I mean agriculture in its modern, efficient seed spreading form and irrigation. They created the sailboat. They designed universities and had the first, let's say, schools, or at least organised schools. They were the first to create advanced written maps, aka they ventured into the area of cartography. They were the first urban civilizations, the first empires, the first democracies. Yes, they actually designed their own version of democracy, and they actually had written laws, which is really interesting, okay? So they came up with laws, commandments, rules that you must follow. The Sumerians were the first to create large-scale buildings, as I mentioned, drawing off that knowledge of angles. You know, they created the concept of angles, or at least our understanding of it even in modern times, and because of that they were able to then create accurately well-scaled, organized buildings. They actually designed and worked with hydraulic engineering, and then aside from that they created the first large-scale organized religions. Okay, now what's really interesting about their religion, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to mention it in another video, so sub or whatever if you want to listen to that. What's interesting though is there are a lot of some similarities between Sumerian religion and many other religions that we actually know and understand. I'll touch on those similarities on another day, Okay? Now, keep in mind, this list is far from exhaustive, and most of these innovations require micro innovations within them. And that's where I really want to, let's say, draw your focus to. So we had the writing, we had the maths, we had hydraulic engineering, schooling, the wheel, the plough, etc. But think about the micro innovations just to get to those large innovations. For example, building cities like they did requires street planning. They created it. Lighting improvements, okay? They designed this. Road building and advanced architectural techniques, okay? So these guys not only created large-scale buildings, but they also had to create the whole system of architectural planning and city planning. Large-scale buildings would have also required some form of cranes or similar machinery. So, what did they do? They obviously created systems to carry large loads. Sailboat construction would probably require shipyards, new tools, and a deeper understanding of water and how it works. So when you read between the lines, you start to realize that almost everything, at least in its proto form, was thought up by the Sumerians. I'm not saying that no other civilization has created things, because we obviously have, every single generation creates something new. But the Sumerians, they created technology in its proto form, okay? They took us from spear welding, let's say, lowly articulate hunter-gatherer species to a city-dwelling species that actually wanted more, wanted to learn more, didn't just want to survive and subsist, but wanted to venture forth and understand things. So you could also argue that they were perhaps the first philosophers as well. What I'm trying to say is, compared to any other civilization, any other culture, prior or after, even ours, the innovations that the Sumerians came up with, discovered, were, let's say, when it comes to like relative leaps, were literally alien-like. They weren't from this planet. They made, I'm not saying the Sumerians are aliens, but I'm saying the innovations, the developments, the inventions that they came up with were so far ahead. It's almost inconceivable. You can't really comprehend how the hell these guys had the understanding that they had. So why don't we learn about them? We often learn a little bit about Egypt at school, We, at best, we go back to biblical or pre-biblical times, but we don't go 6,000 years back to when the Sumerians were flourishing, when the Sumerians were creating many of the things, systems, mathematical systems, written systems, astronomy. When they came up with all of these tools that we use today, why don't we go far back? Why don't we go 6,000 years back and look at them? Now, I don't want to mess with anyone's ideology or question anything, but I do believe there may be some form of control or religious connotations attached to our educational system and the way that we learn. The Sumerians, they're not a secret. They existed. We have so much of their history. You can do a Google search now and find out anything you want, but we're just simply not told about them. It took me over 26, 27 years, just until a few years ago, until I actually found out about the Sumerians via, guess what, YouTube, okay? So what I'm saying is, why don't we learn about the most important and the first major civilization in humanity? It doesn't make sense. I think the problem there is that if many different religious cultures, I'll touch on Christianity, but all of them, okay? I'm not anti-religious, I'm not pro-religious, I am open-minded, okay? But let's just say with regards to Christianity, because when I was younger, I was raised within that sort of society. If you introduce a advanced civilization from pre-Adamites, so pre-Adam peoples, okay? If you introduce an advanced civilization, okay, one that may have believed in aliens that gave them the knowledge that they had, or one that actually almost contained many of the myths that modern religions contain. For example, the Sumerians talk of a great flood that wiped out civilization and things like that. If you start to teach people about that, it's going to be very hard to make them believe in another idea or another view that you have, because they kind of contradict each other, if you know what I mean. So, I mean, if you actually look at most religions, they are very closely intertwined, and I'm not questioning the concept of religion. I think it's a wonderful thing, but I would like to ask the question of how similar are most of the major religions, and how much of that can we stem back to to Egyptian times, and then even further back, the Egyptian beliefs. Can we look at the Sumerian beliefs, and can we draw parallels there? It's just a question, okay? So I'm not trying to push you or sway you in any direction. Please always do your own research. And yeah, as I said, if I've made a mistake with some of my information, you should definitely pull me up about that in the comments. This is my first video. I'll be making many, many more, as you know, so just so you know. But yeah, let me know what you think, guys, okay? Why aren't we taught about the Sumerians? Pretty freaky, right? If you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, leave a comment, get some of the views going. This is the first video. It's a proto video, a tester, let's say. But I've got a ton of exciting topics that I'd like to talk to you guys about, from the ancient pyramids to ancient thoughts on astral projection to futurism and transhumanism. I also want to talk about artificial intelligence. I want to talk about how other animals perceive the world and how intelligent are fungi or plants. So I really want to venture out to, and obviously the Sumerians. I want to cover way more of the Sumerians, but I want to cover basically questions that aren't often answered, or maybe even questions we don't really think about, but we may want to learn more about. Thank you again, and yeah, speak to you guys later, okay? Ciao.